Hi and welcome to SQE Success, your pathway to becoming an English solicitor. In this question bank series, we'll look at 3 questions in relation to fraud, which falls under criminal law in FLK2. Let's dive in. Here's the first question we tackle today. A group of people were dining at a restaurant and asked the waitress for the price of an expensive bottle of wine. The waitress said it would cost them £200. The diners felt it was too expensive and decided not to order it. The restaurant manager, who was employed by the restaurant owner and he himself runs an online business selling wines, overheard the conversation. He approached the diners and offered to sell them the same wine from his own stock for £150, which he had with him at the restaurant. The diners refused the offer. What offense is the restaurant manager criminally liable for, if any, and why? A. He is not criminally liable because no sale took place and no one suffered loss. B. He is criminally liable for fraud by false representation, because he gave a misleading impression by approaching customers in his role as manager. C. He is criminally liable for fraud by failure to disclose information, because he did not inform the diners that the wine was being sold privately. D. He is criminally liable for fraud by abuse of position, because he attempted to profit from his role within the restaurant. E. He is potentially liable for both fraud by abuse of position and failure to disclose information, because he dishonestly acted for personal gain in breach of his duty to the restaurant. You can pause the video and think about it. The best answer is D. He is criminally liable for fraud by abuse of position, because he attempted to profit from his role within the restaurant. Under Section 4 of the Fraud Act 2006, fraud by abuse of position occurs where a person in a position in which they are expected to safeguard the financial interests of another dishonestly abuses that position with intent to make a gain or cause a loss. As a manager of the restaurant, he owed a duty to act in the best financial interests of his employer. By attempting to sell his own wine to restaurant customers while on duty, thus diverting potential business, he abused that position. The offense is complete even if no gain or loss occurs, as long as the dishonest intent is present. Let's look at another question very similar to the first question. Same fact that the diners found the wine too expensive. A man sitting nearby overheard the conversation and approached them. He claimed he was a friend of the restaurant owner and authorized to give discounts on behalf of the restaurant. He offered to sell them the same bottle for £120 and produced it from a box under his table. He was, in fact, not affiliated with the restaurant in any way, but he was a wine supplier with leftover stock in his car. The diners paid him £120 in cash and received the bottle. Is the man criminally liable for an offense under the Fraud Act 2006? A. No, because the diners received the wine they want. B. No, because he was genuinely selling what he claimed. C. Yes, because he abused a position of trust in the restaurant. D. Yes, because he dishonestly made a false representation for financial gain. E. Yes, because he made a false representation, knowing it was untrue, and intended to make a gain. The best answer is E. Yes, because he made a false representation, knowing it was untrue, and intended to make a gain. Under Section 2 of the Fraud Act 2006, a person commits fraud by false representation if they A. Dishonestly make a false representation. B. Knowing that the representation is or might be untrue or misleading. C. With intent to make a gain for themselves or cause a loss to another. The man falsely claimed to be authorized by the restaurant owner to sell at a discount. This was a deliberate misrepresentation intended to induce the diners to buy from him. Even though he provided the correct product, the offense lies in the dishonest misrepresentation and intent to make a gain, not the quality of the goods. While option D is partially accurate, this answer lacks the required mental element, knowledge of the falsity, making E more complete. Here is the third tricky question. Same fact that the diners found the wine too expensive and a man sitting nearby overheard the conversation. He approached the diners, telling them he was the supplier of that wine to the restaurant and offered to sell them a bottle from his own stock for £150. He produced the bottle from a box under his table, and the diners accepted the offer and paid him. The man was indeed the supplier of that wine to the restaurant. However, under his contract with the wine distributor, he was prohibited from selling the wine to anyone other than the restaurant. Is the man criminally liable under any offense of fraud? A. No, because the wine was genuine and the diners were not deceived. B. No, because breach of a contractual restriction is not in itself a criminal offense. C. Yes, because he dishonestly sold the wine in breach of a contractual restriction for personal gain. D. Yes, because he made a false representation about the legality of his ability to sell the wine. E. Yes, because he dishonestly failed to disclose his contractual restriction and intended to make a gain. The best answer is A. No, because the wine was genuine and the diners were not deceived. Although the man may have breached a contractual obligation to his distributor by selling the wine to members of the public, this does not give rise to criminal liability under the Fraud Act 2006. Fraud by failure to disclose information, Section 3, requires a legal duty to disclose, such as one arising by statute, fiduciary duty, or specific legal relationships. A private contract does not create a legal duty to disclose to a third party, the diners, nor was there any false representation made to them. While he may be liable in civil law to the restaurant or distributor for breach of contract, he is not criminally liable for fraud in this scenario. While option B is partly true, it does not address the fact that the diners were not misled and the wine was genuine. Here is the summary of the key legal principles on fraud cases. In the first scenario, the restaurant manager may be guilty of fraud by abuse of position under Section 4 of the Fraud Act 2006. As an employee, he was in a position of trust and was expected to act in the best interests of the restaurant. By trying to sell his own wine to customers while at work, he acted dishonestly to benefit himself, which is a misuse of his position. In the second scenario, the stranger who pretended to be authorized by the restaurant could be guilty of fraud by false representation under Section 2. He lied about having permission to sell wine on behalf of the restaurant. That false claim, made to earn money from the diners, makes him criminally liable. In the third scenario, the wine supplier broke a contract by selling wine directly to the diners when he was not allowed to. However, this is not a crime under the Fraud Act, because breaching a contract doesn't create a legal duty to tell the diners about the restriction. He may be sued in civil court, but he is not criminally liable for fraud. Have you noticed how a slight change in facts, such as the position held and the statement made by a person, can lead to a completely different legal outcome? That's exactly the skill the SQE tests, and mastering it is key to exam success. I published books filled with MCQs, each built with 3 variations of a legal scenario to sharpen your analysis and deepen your understanding. It is a must-read to pass SQE 1. Turn your ambition into qualification. Begin your SQE journey to become an English solicitor.